Welcome back to a Thursday edition of Ron Potesta in the Morning. So the United States looking to reset their relationship with the United Arab Emirates. And joining me on the hotline, Young Voices commentator Lexi Hudson. Lexi, what's the deal with the United States looking to cozy up with the UAE?
Well, with the economic sanctions and challenges with Russian oil, we're revealing how dependent we are on Russia for oil, and we're looking for other sources of oil. And we're seeing that. I mean, it's painful to go fill up our gas tank right now. It's incredibly painful every single time. And so this is an attempt to again, look at other sources of energy. And we are hearing a lot of people right now say that we need to become energy independent. I mean, the fact that we're going to UAE makes us look weak, cap in hand, trying to restore diplomatic and economic relations there. And I think there's a nuance here. I don't know if energy independence is necessarily the end goal. I just think we need to be very intentional and mindful of who we are getting into bed with, so to speak, economically and from an energy perspective. We need to be sure that the people that we are dependent on, allowing ourselves to be dependent on, are aligned with our values. Otherwise, we're going to be tempted to contravene and overlook our principles like individual liberty and human dignity, and maybe not be in a position to criticize countries for their humanitarian abuses.
Lexi Hudson joining me on the hotline. Now, it is to be clear that the gas prices, not only high in the United States, consider ourselves very fortunate compared to the rest of the world. We're actually getting off in a much cheaper way with gasoline, because gas prices in other countries are even worse than the United States. Now, having said that, had President Biden not messed with former President Trump's fuel policy and energy policy, I don't think we would be in this situation that we're in right now, Lexi.
It's a great point. I mean, do you remember just a year and a half ago when gas was $2.50 a gallon during the height of the pandemic? I mean, that seems like a distant dream at this point. But it's an interesting point. I mean, it raises the question, why did Biden nix the Keystone Pipeline initiative without our ally, Canada, a country that shares our values and first principles? And doing so only made us more dependent on countries such as Venezuela or Saudi Arabia. And again, being dependent on these countries makes us less in a position of power to be able to criticize human rights abuses in those nations. They don't have very good human rights track records. And that makes us look like hypocrites. I mean, it's this constant tension between meeting our immediate material needs and interests as a country, but also staying true to the values that we were founded on.
Lexi, you bring up the values, and obviously the UAE has been known to not have very good human rights, especially to minorities and to those that are different, perceived to be different. They don't treat those people very well in the United Arab Emirates, and for us to essentially go with hats off, pleading for oil, that kind of makes us a country that can't exactly say anything about their values or lack thereof.
Exactly. That's exactly correct, Ron. And I mean, we've spent $100 billion in the last 2 years securing peace and just securing the borders of the Gulf states. And I mean, where could that where could those resources have gone domestically, or again, enhancing relationships with countries such as Canada? And so it's just important to think really critically, how are we being perceived? How do we want to be perceived on a world stage? I mean, you'll remember the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post columnist, by the Saudi Arabian government. That was a clear violation of the sanctity of human life, of free speech, and many others we hold dear as a nation. Yet, because we are so dependent on Saudi Arabian oil, we were not in an incredible position of strength to criticize them, and we always have to. We will always be in that position as long as we are dependent on countries like that, and the more that we shirk or avoid having economic, stronger energy relations with countries that are more aligned with our values.
Lexi Hudson joining me on the hotline. Lexi, is there an end game here? I mean, obviously, Russia invading Ukraine, and they're still fighting it out over in Ukraine. Is there an end game? Is there a relief on the horizon in terms of Americans paying an outrageous amount for a gallon of gas?
I don't think it's worth saving a few pennies at the pump in order to give up our dignity as a country, or our credibility as a country. It comes back to hypocrisy and integrity, Ron. Integrity is internal coherence. It's parts of the self making sense together. Or in the case of America, it's living up to the values that we seek to uphold. And I think it's worth it to pay a little bit more at the pump if it means that we are not perceived as hypocrites, and that we are a country of integrity that takes our ideas and our first principles, again, of individual liberty, human dignity, free speech, seriously. And that means making sacrifices to do business with countries that care about those things too. That sends a strong message to ourselves, to American citizens, and also the world, that these are ideals worth sacrificing for.
Young Voices commentator Lexi Hudson joining me on the hotline. Lexi, you have a book coming out.
I do. Thank you for asking. My book is called Against Politeness, coming out with St. Martin's Press, on civility and civil discourse. And it's coming out next spring. So I'm really excited about that. The core argument is that there's a difference between civility and politeness, and making that distinction can lead us to a more unified and bright and more civil future in America.
I got about 535 people that need to read that book, Lexi. If you could provide a free copy to every member of the House of Representatives and the Senate, because I think that that would probably jumpstart the opportunity for both sides to stop moaning and groaning and start working together, because then and only then are we going to get our stuff back to normal here.
That's not a bad marketing idea. Thank you for that, Rod.
I'm just saying. I'm looking out for you, Lexi. Young Voices commentator Lexi Hudson joining me on the hotline. So we're going to be meeting the UAE Monday. This past Monday, the vice president took a visit to the United Arab Emirates. How did that go? Do you have any knowledge of how Vice President Harris and the UAE, how she was received with the country?
From my understanding, it went well. Nothing scandalous or noteworthy. But again, it's worth noting how that meeting makes us look to the rest of the world. And again, it raises the question: why are we going halfway across the world for energy when we have really strong economic allies in our own backyard to look to for energy, and again, that are more aligned with our first principles.
Lexi Hudson joining me again. Mention your book before we let you go, Lexi.
Thank you. My book is Against Politeness: Why Politeness Failed America and How Civility Can Save It. And you can learn more about it at my website, alexandrahudson.com, and also at Civic Renaissance. Civic Renaissance is my newsletter and intellectual community. I reach 100,000 people with my work, and we talk about ideas and intellectual history and why beauty, goodness, and truth can help us live our lives better and heal our frayed souls and public discourse. So would love to, civicrenaissance.com.
Young Voices commentator Lexi Hudson joining me. Lexi, thank you so much for joining me. Look forward to reading your book.
Have a great day. Thank you for having me, Ron.
You as well. Lexi Hudson joining me on the hotline. Otis, I hope that she is going to follow through with the suggestion, because there's about 535 people in Washington that desperately need to read a book about politeness and working together and whatnot. That would be a huge step in the right direction.
I doubt if she's going to give it away.
Well, this is true, but one could hope.